Hello, welcome to RC Video Reviews. EdgeTX 2.9 Release Candidate 1 just dropped, and I'm going to walk you through what's changed. Now, before we get into the radio setups, there is some big news on EdgeTX 2.9 that you need to understand. Up until 2.9, you've been able to migrate from any version of EdgeTX and any version of OpenTX directly to the latest version of EdgeTX. That capability is no longer with us. Around version 2.6, EdgeTX converted the radio storage format from a machine-readable binary format to what we call YAML, which is human readable. But in order to do that, they had to put a conversion tool in the firmware on the radio so that if you came from OpenTX or a prior version of EdgeTX, the radio would convert your binary files into YAML files for you. That capability is now removed. So if you're coming from OpenTX or a version of EdgeTX prior to 2.6, you have two options. Option number one is to flash a firmware like 2.7 or 2.8, and then convert your OpenTX or pre-2.6 EdgeTX to 2.8, and then you can flash 2.9, or you can download EdgeTX Companion, pull your models and settings into your computer, and then flash your radio, and then write your models and settings back, and you'll get the YAML format. So there are two different ways to convert. Just be aware there is no longer an on-radio conversion process from binary format, which is what you have on OpenTX, or versions of EdgeTX prior to 2.6. I'm going to walk you through the highlights of the changelog. The big news in this release is that the LVGL rewrite is complete, so now we have continuity in the graphics scheme again across the entire radio. If you remember, for 2.8, they implemented the first portion of LVGL, but they actually had a little bit of graphical breakage about halfway through the configuration screens where the old layouts were still used. Now the entire radio is realigned for touch, and I gotta say there are some really nice improvements in there. We'll cover those as we go through the menu. One of the other big changes in 2.9 is this feature called Enabled Features, which lets you turn certain tabs on and off that you may or may not want to use. For example, if you don't need the Heli Mixer tab, you can turn it off. If you do need the Heli Mixer tab, you can turn it on. If you don't like to use global functions, you can turn that page off. If you do like to use global functions, you can turn it on. So there are a lot of different configuration capabilities in 2.9 that we didn't have before. Nice changes there. There's a note here about improvements to the USB joystick support, and I have taken a look at the menu, and I got to be honest with you, I'm not exactly sure what everything does there. So I will give you a look at it, but I won't have a lot of detail on that one just yet. I'll try and dig into that a little bit more with the developers and see what I can learn, but there are some definite new capabilities in the joystick mode, including the ability of using the radio with the radio simulator in EdgeTX Companion. They also added formal support for FRM 303. That's the AFH DS3 module that I talked about in a prior video from FlySky, so that's now officially supported. And they added support for another module called a multiplex M-Link. There have been a handful of other updates, including some updates for black and white radios. I'll cover those in another video if I see some comments indicating a desire for me to cover 2.9 on the black and white screen. Otherwise, this video is going to be focused on what we see on the color radios. On the left-hand side, I've got 2.8.3. This is my production radio. It's the one I fly with every time I go to the field. On the right-hand side, I've got Precious, and that has 2.9 Release Candidate 1. I've already started with the system menu, and we're just going to go through the menu so you can see what's going on. I've also got the video zoomed in as close as I can to still be able to get both screens side by side. So that's what I'm interested in showing you, is what's on these screens. On the very first screen, that's the tools scripts. I see the same type of configuration on 2.9 that I see on 2.8. I really don't see anything new. Some of these buttons might be different, but that's more along the lines of what Lua scripts are installed. So I don't really see any different configuration options there. Next, we'll move to the SD card by pressing page right, and the screen looks about the same. We'll click on firmware here, and I'm just going to long press on a binary on each one of these. So let's see here. There's a TX16S binary. We'll use 2.8.3. I'm going to click that and then long press it, and we'll see what the options are. I've got Flash Bootloader, Copy, Rename, Delete, and here's 2.9 Release Candidate 1. I'll long press that one, and we've got Flash, Copy, Rename, Delete. So I don't see anything new there, no new functionality in that area. So we'll go ahead and move on from the SD card by pressing page right. And we have our date and time at the top. This is the radio setup screen, date and time at the top. Sound, variometer, haptic, alarms, backlight, GPS. No changes there, but that's where the differences are. So notice there's a power off delay on 2.8.3 and on 2.9, release candidate 1. That's where we see that enabled features function I talked about earlier. So when you click on that, you have the ability on the radio menu tabs, that would be on the system side of things, to turn off themes, global functions, or trainer. And then on the model menu, that's when you use this button on the right-hand side, the model button. Then you can turn heli, flight modes, global variables, curves, logical switches, special functions, and telemetry off. So you have the ability to turn off quite a bit if you don't use those features. Very nice. We'll do one. We'll just pick one. I'll do global variables because I don't know what's been changed there, but we'll just do global variables. So we'll back out of that screen and we'll go back to the main setup screen, and then we'll pick up where we left off at power off delay and owner ID, country code, voice language. So you can change your language now, and there's a subfolder architecture on the sounds folder that will allow you to change language on the fly. So if you unpack the entire sounds zip file from the EdgeTX GitHub, you should have all of these languages on your radio now if you want to use them. So I'll stick with English because that's what I know how to read and write. All right, units, imperial, play delay, no changes there. USB mode, rotary encoder, no changes. Mode and model quick select. Okay, model quick select, if you don't know about that one, it's a really nice feature. I'll show you real quick how that one works. If you long press on the model button and you get into your model selection page, you can double tap a model and it will select it and load it for you. So that's a really cool feature. All right, so that's what that model quick select is. If you haven't enabled that yet, I highly recommend it. I like that feature. All right, the next page will be the themes page, and we'll look for any changes there. I'm just going to pick a theme and long press it, and we'll see what we'll highlight it first, and then long press it and see what the options are. Set active, edit, duplicate, delete, and I'll long press this one. Set active, edit, duplicate, delete. So I don't really see any changes there. We'll go ahead and move on. Okay, here's where you see a graphical change. This is the old style before LVGL, so you see how it's all square here, and this is the new style. It's a little bit more rounded. Now, while I know they worked on making it more touch-friendly, one observation I have is that the global function box is taller on the old version than it is on the new version, but that's okay. We'll press it once and hit edit, and then we'll press this one once and hit edit. And here's where you really start to see how the touch functions have made a change. On the left-hand side, these rectangles are quite a bit smaller. You can still get to them, but they are quite a bit smaller. On the right-hand side, they're a bit taller and definitely easier to hit. And I think they did a good job maybe making more use of the screen. So I think that looks good. I don't have any issues with this. It looks really good. Okay, that's it for global functions. And next up is the trainer screen. The only difference I saw on this one was they took cal and multiplier and moved them over to the right-hand side. That's it. You still have AETR, and you've got, oh, look, they did make a change. Instead of using these cryptic colon equals, which is the replace or add function, they just relabeled it add or replace. Good job. I mean, that certainly makes it a little easier to understand. We're not all programmers, right? So having plain English on there, that's a nice little feature. I like that update quite a bit. Good job, Edge team. Way to go. Very good. Okay, that's it on that one. Now let's look at the hardware page. And at the top, we've got our battery meter range. And again, you can see the difference in the layout. This box is taller than this box. And you can tell right away by looking at the bottom row. This ends at external RF. This one ends at internal RF. So you can see things are definitely a little taller here. So you got your battery meter range, calibration, RTC, ADC filter, mute if no sound. That's a new option. I'll have to check into that one and see exactly what they mean by that. Well, let's go ahead and scroll up. We've got our internal RF type, multi, external RF, normal. Our serial port controls look like they're the same. Our inputs look like they're the same. And our debug, let's take a look at debug because sometimes they surprise us with that. So we've got our calibrated analogs, our filtered raw with deviation, our unfiltered raw analogs, and our min, max, and average. Okay, so no changes there. That all looks the same. And then keys, we'll just take a look. Yep, same keys menu as far as I can tell. You notice SJ down here. That's because I installed another button on this radio. So that's nothing new from the UI. Okay, the next one is the information screen. And you can see I've got 2.8.3 Flying Dutchman here. And I've got 2.9 Release Candidate 1 Providence over here. And if I click on the modules, we've got internal module off, external module CRSF, and status 333. I wonder if they've got the version number on there now. Let's go ahead and check this by going into the model configuration, and we will turn on CRSF. I have to put a module in here. Let me just put a Express LRS module in there real quick, and we will turn on CRSF, and I think we can verify that I've got a live wire there, and we'll go back to the system menu, and we will look at that modules page again, and we are still showing the packet rate instead of the version number on the module. So status is showing packet rate. Okay, no changes there. All right, that's it for the system side. Let's go take a look at the model side. On the model setup screen, the first thing I notice is the model name field is taller. So on the left-hand side, it's quite a bit smaller. On the right-hand side, it's taller. We've got our label screen, our image, our use global functions over here on the left. There is a toggle switch for use global functions, and that has been relocated on 2.9. We'll get into that in just a minute. The ADC filter is still there in the same spot. And then in terms of the controls, we have a collapsed set of configuration options: internal, external, trainer. That top row is the same. Timer 1, 2, and 3. The middle row is the same. Pre-flight checks, trims, and throttle. That is the same. And that is it on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, we've got our enabled features. This is where you can override the global settings. And then we've got our joysticks. So let's take a look at enabled features real quick. So on your radio menu, they show what the global feature is. And in case of themes, it's on. Global functions is on. Trainer is on. Let's see if global setup caught my global variables being off, and it did. And you see how that global variables is off right there? Remember, on the system menu, I turned that off. So that's what it's showing you. That's showing you what you have set in the system side, of the configuration. And of course, you can override that on a per model configuration, which is what we're doing here. Let's go ahead and turn global variables on because I want to look at those. So we'll turn that on for this model. And that's how we override the global setting. And for the heli setup, I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. So let's turn the heli setup off. And that's it. We'll leave it at that. Okay, I'll back out of the enabled features and we'll take a look at the USB joystick. The mode classic has an option now called advanced, and under advanced, this is what I mean. It's a little bit more complex than what I'm used to seeing. So under interface mode, you have gamepad, multi-axis, and joystick. I'm really not sure what the functional differences are. Again, I'll look into this and see if we can produce a video on the joystick updates later. And then under circular cutout, XY, I really don't know what this means. It's got to have something to do maybe with gamepads. I'm just not sure. But anyway, you have a circular cutout option. And then it looks like you can assign buttons, axis, or sim and inversion right here in your joystick configuration. And I guess that changes the outputs before the PC sees it. That's my guess. So anyway, a lot more control over your USB joystick. Boy, they weren't kidding. I'm going to have to do my homework on that one. And that is the bottom of the configuration page for model setup. We'll press page right and take a look at flight modes. This one got my attention right away because it is substantially different than the old one and a definite improvement. So if we look at flight mode 0 on both radios, that's over here on the left, and it's right here on the right. It's along the top. So a little bit more UI consistent, but you also get to see a lot more data on the screen. So you can see immediately what's going on in terms of delay in, delay out, where your trims are, what the name of it is, and what flight mode you're in. So I like this. This screen on the right definitely is more informative. So if we go ahead and edit these, you can see that, again, they're taking advantage of the screen space, and they did away with the trims setup button, and they just went ahead and put the trims in the flight mode menu, and I think that's fine. It just saves you a button press, and so instead of pressing a button, you just scroll a little bit. On the 2.8.3, you can press setup and you get that same information, but in a little pop-up window. So I kind of like this one better. It's just easier to get to. Why have the pop-up if you don't need it? So I think that looks good. And again, you can tell the buttons are designed for touch. The fade in and fade out is a little taller than it is over here on 2.8.3. So good job on the flight modes. I like that improvement. And it does feel a little bit more consistent with the overall UI on the radio. So I think this is just fine. All right, next up are inputs. We'll go ahead and edit one of the inputs on both. I'll click edit here and here. And the first thing I noticed on 2.9 is they added a scroll bar between the input controls and the graph. So the graph is still the same. It seems to be functionally the same, but you see there's a little scroll bar now. So if I scroll down, I see that I have more controls. On this one, you can still scroll down, but there's no visual indicator that you need to do that. So you just kind of had to know. If you didn't know the radio, you wouldn't know to scroll down. So that's kind of a nice feature because it's a good indicator, especially for people just coming to EdgeTX. Well done, guys, on that one. And same deal with the controls. They're definitely taller. So we'll back out of inputs. Oh, you know what? In inputs, let's check one more thing real quick. I want to hit that gear icon, and we'll check it against this one as well. The gear icon. I don't think there's anything different, but we have side, trim, and flight mode. So yeah, nothing different there at all. It all looks the same. Okay, very good. So we'll back out of inputs. We'll now head over to the mixer. I don't see any physical changes in terms of the layout here from 2.8.3. And this is about where they stopped on 2.8.3. So I think the mixer was like the last page. But you do see the older square format where on 2.9 it's rounded. The corners are rounded. And the controls are definitely taller. Here's weight. That box is thinner or shorter than this one. So yep, definite difference there. No question about it. You've got offset, switch, curve, no changes there. We'll click on the gear icon. We've got multiplex, add, replace, or multiply. And then we've got our flight modes, trim, warnings, delays, and speed. Yep, no changes in the advanced setup for the mixer. And of course, our mix and output monitor is still at the top, so no changes there. Okay, very good. Now we'll move on from the mixer into outputs, and we still have add all trims to subtrims at the top, extended limits, and I don't really see any changes here. We'll just edit both of those. Again, these are just touch changes, so the boxes are rounded, a little bit taller. All the controls look like they're in the same spot, so you won't have anything to relearn on outputs either. All right, next up are curves. Nice change on curves. This is one area that I really had a problem with because in 2.8.3, you look at a curve and you're like, well, where do you press to edit? You know, my finger goes there to the left-hand side, and that's not where you do it. Then I thought, oh, maybe it's the graph. Well, the graph doesn't do it either. You have to go in the white space over on the side to get the dialogue to edit your graph. Now on 2.9, they really clean that up. So you get a nice visual representation of the curves that you have. And then when you click on it, you can edit it. It's much more intuitive. I don't think the controls changed any. Got a couple little layout differences, but that's about it. As far as accessing the curves go, I like 2.9 way better, far more intuitive, and you get a lot more data in a much smaller space. So on 2.8.3, you only had one curve basically taking up the whole screen. You get up to 3 curves on 2.9. Good job on that, guys. Well done. Here are our global variables, and I don't really see any layout differences other than, again, graphics. So you can tell this is the screen where we definitely saw a change from the prior version. So everything here is a box. All these buttons are real small. And you did see quite a bit more information on the screen on the left than you do on the screen on the right. You're going to be scrolling a little bit. But again, touch friendly. I think the button controls look a lot better, and we also have, instead of just a 0 there, which might be not so intuitive for somebody that was new, you actually list the flight modes. So you can change the flight modes by just hitting the plus sign, and they're showing you that you are changing a flight mode. So I think that looks good. Okay, we'll back out of global variables and we'll move on to logical switches. I'll have to add one on this side. We'll add one on this side too. On this one, okay, so they did what they did on the mixer page. So if you look at 2.9 on the mixer, they don't just automatically populate the entire list of mixes. Now, I have a bad example here because I already have a model that's set up, but they don't just have this endless list. They'll give you the first 4 when you do create new model, and then after that, you have to hit add and pick the channel that you want to add. So they followed that through on the logical switches. So instead of giving you a list like they do on 2.8.3, you have to actually add a logical switch. So you pick the one you want, and we'll go ahead and edit one of these just so we can see. We've got function through delay on this screen, and we do see function through delay on this screen as well, but it takes the whole screen. So again, better use of space, easier to touch. I think that's perfect. Nice layout. They're doing great with this. Nice update. It's a real refinement, I think, over what we saw on 2.8.3. They kind of finished the job. All right, next up is the special functions page. Again, same deal. You don't have this endless list over here. 60 of them, is it 60? 64, yep. You don't have that list anymore. You have to add the ones you want. So that's fine. I like that. It's good. Now we'll just click on this one and edit. And same deal. We've got our... Okay, instead of calling it a switch, over here they call it a switch, over here they call it a trigger, which is good because it's not always a switch. It could be an event like a logical switch, for example, or it could be a dial or a push button. So I think calling it a trigger is smart. Then you've got function, channel, value, and enable. So everything else looks to be about the same. I do applaud the concept of moving away from the name switch and calling it a trigger. I think that makes sense to me. Okay, the next page is telemetry, and we'll scroll all the way to the top on both, and there are definite changes here. So I'm going to pick a model that has some sensors because things are different here. So give me a moment. Let's switch models. All right, I switched models to one that has some sensors. And you can see right away there's a difference. On the left-hand side, we've got our RSSI alarm, critical alarm, and disable. On the right-hand side, we start off with sensors. And then on 2.8.3, you can scroll past the sensors and you get down to discover, add, and delete. We'll check that over on the right-hand side. And the buttons are now much bigger. I think that looks way better. This is kind of an odd layout because you got a small discover, a small add, and a big delete. So that's cool. I think that makes a lot more sense. Looks correct. And then you have show instance ID and ignore instances. That instance ID, I guess, is if you have maybe, let's turn it off and see what happens. We'll turn that off. Okay. So instance ID, it's an ID number, and I guess that's probably, I don't know, I'm not sure exactly who can use that. Maybe that's a developer thing. I'm not sure. I've never really needed an ID before, but maybe that'll help you if you have 2 sensors. Maybe it'll help you distinguish between the 2. So, okay, next up we get our RSSI low, critical, and disable. And I do want to show you something that I caught. I bet the developers didn't think I was going to catch this, but I did. Notice how this says RSSI. This has been one of the things that has really needed to be fixed in EdgeTX for a long time, and it looks like they finally did it. So notice I have RSSI, okay? I'm going to go over to my model settings. I'm going to change my external RF from FlySky. I'm just going to make it CRSF. And then we're going to go back to that telemetry screen. And when I get down to the bottom, look at how that alarm is now changed to RQLY, which probably should be capitalized because RSSI is capitalized, but whatever. RQLY, low alarm, critical alarm. The reason that's important is because unbeknownst to you, if you didn't watch my video on how to set up ELRS telemetry correctly, you probably didn't know that even though it said RSSI at the top, this is a fixed label over here on 2.8.3. It says RSSI, but you weren't getting RSSI. That's not what was being triggered for your alarms. You were actually getting RQLY if you used Express LRS or CRSF, TBS Crossfire. When you're using a D16 protocol from FreeSky, then you're actually getting RSSI first. So I'm really happy that the developers changed that one, because now you have a more accurate representation of the primary measure or telemetry instance that the protocol developer feels you should be monitoring. That's the primary one that's being delivered to the radio, the first one, and you can set your alarm accordingly. So if you're on Express LRS, you might say, well, I'm happy with RQLI down to 20. That's fine. And, you wouldn't be wrong. And then you can say critical, let's go down to 10. If I'm down to 10, I kind of want to know that. Okay. So good job on that, developers, EdgeTX guys, way to go. And then we've got disable telemetry alarms. That option is over here on the top, and now it's down here on the bottom. And then of course we have the variometer, and it kind of makes sense that they group this together. It just kind of, they put things in logical groups that I instead of splitting it up with sensors in the middle. So over here you had your RSSI text and alerts, then you had a list of sensors, and then you had your variometer texts and alerts. So now they've got everything grouped together. You can still choose source, range, center, and so on. So that all looks fantastic. That wraps up my first look at EdgeTX 2.9 Release Candidate 1. I'd like to say thanks so much to the EdgeTX development team. You guys are always awesome. We really appreciate what you're doing for us, keeping this firmware fresh and updated. Thank you very much. We appreciate your labor and your work. If you like this kind of content, make sure you smash that thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell so you know when new videos hit the channel. YouTube should recommend another video for you right about now. That's all I've got for today. Go fly something.